everybody? Tyre Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully everyone's doing well on this Saturday morning here. We already know what we're here to talk about. It's pretty much D-Day here, and we're going to really take a deep dive into the parameters for today. And I've got some crazy stuff to tell you here. So brace yourselves, buckle up, and hit that like button as well. If you're new, also hit that subscribe button too. And definitely urge you to share today, because this could get pretty dangerous, especially considering that we're looking at a potential nocturnal threat here. So a few changes since last night. For one, we're still at slight risk, but there's actually been rumor of a potential upgrade around 12:30 Eastern time for me, which would be 11:30 Central time for a lot of these guys. I'm not still full on sure where they would put an enhanced risk yet. I'm definitely thinking that we would start out more so with the region here, over towards the towards this tri-state region that I've been talking about. But I do notice that there are better kinematics in this area, and we'll go over why I'm talking that this area is going to be possibly upgraded to an enhanced risk. Still not set in stone. I'm not entirely sure if they're going to add a hatched risk to the tornado threat or wind threat or whatever you may. But I also have noticed that we have shifted this slight risk and even the tornado risk further off to the east here. So the progression of the trough has definitely changed just a little bit since the last model run here, but now we're also starting to include central Mississippi. We're getting Birmingham into play, even parts of northwest Georgia, Chattanooga, Tennessee, you're in there as well. So we're going to have to be watching a lot of these areas. This looks like it could be a longer duration event. So like I said, buckle up. We'll be probably going live somewhere around 4:30 or 5. Not entirely sure as to when we'll do that or not. I may even do an update stream within the next little bit here, depending on how things play out. But the tornado threat and the wind threat are definitely going to be the dominant threats. Hail threat is still going to be a little bit further out to the west, and they've kind of shrunk this area. They've kind of downsized it a bit. Still have Nashville, Jackson that could see some large hail here too. Greenville, Mississippi. It's no surprise that you guys are in there. I've been talking about that area all week, so no real surprises there. If we go into the kinematics here, looking at the data from the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, no real major changes with our trough here. But what I want you to notice here is we always are kind of looking towards the fringe of this trough here, usually looking for what we call the ski jump here. And watch what happens as we go towards O2 and O3Z. We kind of see a little bit of an area trying to develop right about here. I think this was a big factor as to why the SPC would eventually stretch the slight risk area off to the east here. I'm leaning more towards a damaging wind threat with this, but embedded tornadoes could also be possible as well. I do think that'll be earlier in the evening. Once we get into the overnight, I think the threat will eventually start to taper off. But if we go to the 850s here, here's another thing to make note of. We go ahead and go all the way to when our projected time for the storms begins here. You can see that we have a decent bit of low-level jet energy existent already by 21Z, which would be about 4 o'clock. And that hangs around into the evening hours here. So this is another big factor as to why the threat has been pushed a little further to the east as well. You see some stronger low-level jet even over here towards northwest Georgia as well. So could be an extension of that slight risk into the following day, maybe the early morning hours, possibly a little further to the north here. All depends on the temperatures and instability. But it seems like we do have ample instability, in particular towards the lower levels. And we'll kind of start to go to dual screen here to kind of show the different areas that we'll be looking at throughout the day here. All right, so here we are in split screen mode. We're currently looking at both the southeast and parts of the sub-Ohio Valley here. And the main thing that I want to make note of first here is the moisture return has gotten notably more consistent with pushing more so towards Tennessee and Kentucky now. You can kind of see this as we go forward. Both of these models are HRRR. We're just kind of highlighting the different areas here. And you can see by the time we get to 16Z on both of these, we're getting all the way towards Louisville with those 60-degree plus dew points. More than enough moisture to get some severe weather going here. And as we continue to push here, this is getting towards 21Z. Look how this is almost even making it all the way to Kentucky Indiana line here, so more than sufficient enough moisture return for severe weather here. Even better return over here, of course, to the southeast. This is right around the time where we start to get some initialization going around 22Z. You can see it on both runs here. But we get really rich dew points right around that area I've been talking about over towards Greenville. So areas just to the south of that will be a point of interest for me in particular earlier on in the evening. So probably be watching that more when I'm streaming. As time goes on though, watch what happens. We still have those really ripe dew points over here into central Alabama, southern Mississippi, southern Louisiana. So this is going to be a long night just based off of what we're seeing with this alone. And this is also a prevalent thing as we get later into the evening here across parts of Tennessee in particular. So even Nashville has to be watched as we get into the point where we're having the sunset, so to speak. So another parameter that we'll look at, of course, is temperature. Temperature is a key component here. And also another thing to make note of will be cloud cover, which we'll get into in just a moment here. But you can clearly see with this over here, we'll start out with the Ohio Valley here. By the time we get into the early afternoon, look, we're even getting into the 80s in some parts of Louisiana here, mid 70s across this region here, and even up further to the north, we're seeing those temperatures getting into the mid to upper 60s, more than sufficient enough for severe weather. And then over here towards southern Alabama, even we're getting into those mid 70 degree temperatures. I was about to call it dew points. So the environment looks pretty good here. This is kind of giving an indicator that there's going to be breaks within the cloud cover that we could be seeing this morning. So as a result here, I think that this is a much more likely severe event to take place here. Of course, there's other fail parameters that could happen here. Any little infliction of dry air around the surface low could play a role in this as well, in inhibiting storm development. CAP could try to develop, but I don't consider it very likely at this point. But looking at cloud cover, this is going to be a key factor, and especially over towards Tennessee, Kentucky in particular is where I'm really interested in it. Over here towards the south here, if we were to continue to go forward here, and I don't know why it's jumped this far ahead, but you can actually see that we have some decent breaks within the clouds here. So we're able to get some of that diurnal or daytime heating, as a lot of us know it as, beginning to take shape here. And this is what really concerns me, the fact that we can get that daytime heating going. These storms will really start to take off more. They're more likely to take off. And with the subtle forcing that we were seeing from the mid to upper levels here, there's potential for some discrete cells early on too. If we go over here a little further up to the north, cloud cover is a little bit more stubborn, but there are breaks here and there as well. In particular, I'm watching towards Tennessee, just to the east of Memphis, more or less here, maybe to the southwest of Nashville. Might be some areas that I need to watch a little bit more closely there too. But can't even rule it out over here towards Kentucky either. So could be a big day. There's potential for it. This has a good ceiling to it. This has a pretty high ceiling to it if it can get going. And it seems like it might. But like I said, there's still other unknowns that can cause this setup to be a complete bust, which for a lot of us would be ideal, unless you're a storm chaser. But that being said here, some other parameters to look at, and this is when we start to get into the severe stuff here, is looking at our instability. In particular, we're kind of looking towards the lower levels of the atmosphere as far as instability is concerned. We're going to start with what's called 0 to 3 kilometer Cape. So this is usually looking about maybe 20,000 feet into the atmosphere. And what I've noticed immediately is that we're going to have an exceptional amount of 0 to 3 Cape. Usually about 100 joules per kilogram from 0 to 3 is impressive for Cape. Usually when we look at Cape, we look at the mixed layer, which shows all levels of the atmosphere. We're looking in a particular layer here. This is really helpful in trying to discover which storms will be more likely to be rooted to the ground, and this could help increase tornado potential as well. Take a sounding of this, for example, here. While it's not the most impressive sounding I've ever seen, still you can kind of see a little bit of a correlation with that with the marginal tornado threat, but I think this is going to be more or less on the flank of the front here. I do think that better instability probably exists right around here, where we still also have 200 joules per kilogram at 0 to 3, and look is a lot better. There are some other factors here that don't impress me as much, so much as the lapse rates aren't quite that steep. Even so, there's still a very significant hail threat with this, as well as a high damaging wind potential along with our tornado threat. But the Cape's off the charts here, about 3,000 joules per kilogram at the surface. So, like I said, could be a high ceiling day, could be nothing at all still, but plenty of instability available, especially as we get later into the evening. I think tornado threat really will start to ramp up right around 24, like 23Z to 00Z once that low level jet kicks in. You can kind of see that a little bit more with this right here. Very high 3 cape on this sounding here, 232 joules per kilogram. Overall surface cape, 2,500 joules, mixed layer at 2,800. So it's like I said, a lot of potential, and I think the later we get into the evening, the more the potential increases for this region. I would actually say maybe more so later in the evening for this area too. I think the window is going to be shorter for this, but nonetheless here, we were to go, let's say, towards northern Tennessee, 133 joules per kilogram, sufficient enough. But what's got my attention the most when we look at this skew T is the fact that we have that 0 to 3 shear jumping up to about 50 knots here. We're a little closer to the low, so the air temperature is not going to be quite as warm, but this is going to be more of that high shear, low cape type setup. So you always have to watch that surface low for reasons just like this. Very good kinematics, and there's also going to be a lack of capping inversion, so it's going to kind of help work. It's going to help the potential of these storms here. The hail threat's going to be a lot lower here, of course. Not quite as much energy to work with overall here, but at the surface it's going to be maybe sufficient enough to spawn a couple of tornadoes here. As we continue to go forward here, of course, we'll watch the threat kind of hang more so to the south here, maybe over towards Nashville by the time we get later into the evening. By the overnight, we're going to probably start to see this begin to diminish a little bit, but I do think that it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest to see a couple of pulse severe storms at that point too, maybe even towards central Alabama and into Georgia, even maybe even Atlanta. So I guess the next thing we'll look at here will be the shear here. We're going to look at storm relative felicities from 0 to 3 kilometers here. So this will give us a good look at our damaging wind potential and our tornado potential here. So looking at this, we're going to go with this look here. We start to, like I said, we really start to see those higher helicities as we get later into the evening. More so earlier in the day, I think that this region over here towards the Ohio Valley looks a little bit better. So like I said, this could be a sleeper right here, this region here. Like I said, kinematically, it's really impressive. Thermals is really going to be questionable, but it's, like I said, it's sufficient enough. You really can get away with lower cape events if you have enough kinematics to help overcome that, and it looks like we have that in abundance here. So could be a dangerous day over here towards Kentucky and Tennessee here. Like I said, it's really going to be early in the day where I'm looking more so at that area. Later in the evening is really going to be where I think things get pretty active here. Nice little pocket where we get some really high helicities here. 0 to 1 looks really impressive at this point, but some of the other parameters aren't quite as good. So like I said, a lot of different things you have to read into when making an outlook for this, so to speak. If we go with our significant tornado parameter, you can almost expect at this point with the factors in play here, we could see some high numbers, some high values here. Also over here, we could see some pretty high values later in the day. There's a little bit more isolated look here, but when you look at this here, you can definitely tell that this kind of has the look of a embedded supercell, maybe. Definitely has that linear look, but not quite as impressive as what I was expecting it to be over here. I think the threat really is going to start shifting. The tornado threat really might be shifting more so to the north here based off of these model scans here. It's just one of those things with winter time in particular that you always have to be watchful of. I think earlier in the day, like I said here, right around 20Z, you have some high potential over here towards Tennessee, just outside of Memphis there. Then as we continue to draw forward here, you can go towards 23Z. You can see that we have Central Tennessee coming into play here, and then later into the evening, we have to watch, of course, that little tri-state region here. Later into the evening, we get, of course, the tornado threat really starts to lessen. Could be a couple of odd spots here where we could maybe have better chances of tornado, but even so, it's nothing incredible. Of course, this is only one model that I'm looking at. If I try to go over this with every model, it'll probably be an hour-long video. But we're going to go ahead and take one more look at we're going to take a couple of more parameters to look at here. We're going to start out with the updraft velocity here for both these regions. And like I said, I really expect these values to be a little bit higher over here towards the Ohio Valley in particular, because we're closer to that low, and you usually will get better lift around that low pressure area. So like I said, I'm really starting to see a little bit more of a shift more to the northeast, which doesn't necessarily surprise me too much here. Here's some good values here, for example. Like I said, this is towards southern Kentucky. Not a surprise to see that at all. Of course, right around that tri-state region, I'm seeing a little bit more bias towards maybe just to the southeast of Greenville, maybe, to where we could see a little bit more activity possible there with maximum updraft velocity. But we'll have to see how things play out here. I think the timing is really going to be the key with that. So last thing we'll look at is the timing of the overall storms in general. We're already seeing some shower and maybe a couple rumbles of thunder here and there over towards Georgia here, towards North Carolina and parts of Tennessee. But like I said, we eventually see those clouds burn off in pockets here and there. And this is really a good setup to create maybe a couple of strong tornadoes here. I remember instances like the Mayfield event, not saying that this will be that, but we didn't have a full-on just break of the clouds, break of a cap here. We had this kind of hold off until the time was right. And here's some of those cells really starting to pop up around 21Z, which would be about 4 o'clock. So really, depending on how things trend throughout the day, will determine what time we end up live. But we will be live today, so make sure you don't miss that. So here's a look at the Ohio Valley here. By the time we get to 22Z, this one business really is expected to pick up here. And we start to see some of those discrete cells as we get later into the evening. This is when we start to get into the twilight hours of the day and going into that after dark time frame here. So that's a little bit problematic there. But once we get towards 01Z, we start to see an increase in coverage, but it looks like it gets a lot more linear from this look here. And then by the time we get to 03Z, we start to see these storms weaken just slightly. By the time we get towards the overnight hours, we start to see these really start to come apart by this point. So a lot to keep track of here. I know this is getting into the really nitty gritty, but we're at that time where we need to get into the details here. Like I said, we'll be live probably within the next few hours here, so make sure you're staying tuned for that. Appreciate it if you show up. If you do, say hi. We'll be here for a while. But that being said, I'll see you guys soon. It's been Tired Metalhead Weatherman. You guys take care and have a good rest of your Saturday. And stay safe and stay weather aware. Horns up.